Is that the new Frankenstein's monster? I can fix him. Spoiler alert, I will be talking about the plot of Frankenstein, both the 1818 novel by Mary Shelley and the 2025 film adaptation by Guillermo Del Toro. So if you don't want any details, go and watch the film first, read the book, then come on back.
That goes without saying.
Also, I try to keep the show as G-rated as possible so that grown-ups can listen to it while there's kids in the room, but this is Frankenstein we're talking about. There's a lot of icky, nasty, gross, squishy content in this story, so if any of that is going to make any of you queasy, maybe listen to it when that person's not in the room. I finally got a chance to see Frankenstein, Guillermo Del Toro's new adaptation of the novel by Mary Shelley. Oh, and if you're wondering why I count Frankenstein as children's literature, the author was only 18 when she started writing it, making it literal, actual teen fiction. I also feel that the characters and themes in the story have a lot to offer teenagers, especially those who have had a rough childhood. I have way too much to say about this movie, which is what I expected because Del Toro is a director that makes beautiful, exciting, interesting movies, with practical effects, real sets, handmade props, and immersive and haunting visuals. This is not a director who just green screens everything. That's a real boat. That is a real puppet. Those are real abs.
Oof.
But you're not here for a regular old movie review. You're here to find out how it compares to the book, and how many Snapes I'll award it for its faithfulness to its literary source material. I loved this movie. I had almost lost hope that an old-fashioned masterpiece like this could even be made anymore. Everything from color choices, costuming, lighting, and the way shots are framed is done thoughtfully and with care. However, Guillermo del Toro did make very big changes to the plot and characters of the book by Mary Shelley. The casting is excellent, and it's an example of how actors can come from any background as long as they look accurate to what's written on the pages of the book. Victor is from Switzerland. His hair and eye color are never given, but he's described as going wild-eyed and becoming very gaunt and haunted by the end of the story, and he's played perfectly by Oscar Isaac, who happens to be Latino. Elizabeth is a beautiful young woman from Italy, and the half-Canadian, half-Brazilian Mia Goth brings her wonderfully to life and death. And the creature is, let's say, multi-ethnic? And Aussie Jacob Elordi puts in a legendary performance. I think it's interesting that the three leads all have mixed ethnic backgrounds and come from globe-trotting families because this actually matches the characters in the novel. I like the story Del Toro told, even if it's completely different from the one that's in the novel. So as I discuss the two different versions of Frankenstein, please don't think that I'm hating on either one. Think of them as ghoulish, freaky little fraternal twin monsters. And as we all know, you shouldn't have favorite children. The framing of the story is the same as in the book. Some sailors in the Arctic find a man who's badly wounded out on the pack ice. In the book, the sailors are English, and in the film they're Danish, which suits me just fine because there is no better choice than Lars Mikkelsen as the captain, who has the huge responsibility of holding the entire narrative together. The man turns out to be Victor, who tells his story. Then the creature shows up, and he tells his story. Then Victor dies. In the book, the creature wanders off onto the ice to die, but in the movie, he wanders off on the ice to live. I told you there'd be spoilers. This film adaptation removed quite a lot of the characters and added one significant character. The main difference is that everybody in the movie is a lot more rich and a lot more posh than they were in the book. The other major difference is that the creature is now no longer a mortal amalgamation of human remains, but a superhuman amalgamation of human remains. The Frankenstein family get an upgrade from being well-off commoners to nobility. Historical purists will be annoyed by the idea that Victor's dad was a baron who worked as a medical doctor and who homeschooled his son. Nobles didn't have jobs, and they hired other people to educate their kids. Victor's dad goes from being a good-hearted, upstanding citizen of the community to a cold, cruel, and controlling man whose family fears rather than loves him. In fact, all of the Frankensteins have been transformed from a loving bunch to a dysfunctional family. Del Toro wrote out little brother Ernest and aged up William from a child to an adult. And Victor's mother dies giving birth to William rather than of scarlet fever. This change gives Victor extra psychological scars as he grows up believing that his father let his mother die, and he knows that his little brother is the favorite. Victor's best friend Henry Clerval has been written out, and Del Toro created an entirely new character, war profiteer Heinrich Harlander, played brilliantly by Christoph Waltz. Harlander is a great character. He has all the money in the world, but he's dying, so he hopes that by funding Victor's work, he can get himself a nice new body. He writes a blank check to fund Victor's experiments conducted in an elaborate remote tower that could totally be on the cover of a heavy metal album. He also helps Victor gather the, ingredients that he needs for his experiments. The only problem with this is that because of Harlander's involvement, dozens, if not hundreds of people would have known what Victor was up to, and I just don't see wider society condoning what he was doing. Maybe, a few corrupt cops might have taken some money for the bodies of convicts, but I don't see military officers surrendering war dead for these kind of ghoulish, freakish things that Victor wanted to do to their bodies. So that's a quibble on my part, but it is a little bit of a plot hole. Harlander's cash also means that Victor doesn't personally have to do a lot of the work needed to source the ingredients that he needs for his experiments. In the book, Victor has to sneak into morgues and anatomy labs to steal what he needs. And that makes him very, very personally responsible. And this is a big part of why his guilt compounds later. It's all on him. But in this case, the guilt is kind of spread out to a wider society that really seems to be condoning what he's up to. I did feel the absence of Henry Clerval. He's never gotten represented properly on film. In the book, Henry is Victor's lifelong best friend. He's decent and loyal and good and lives an exemplary life. He sidelines his university studies to care for Victor when he becomes dangerously ill. And what does he get for all of that? The creature does him in purely to get back at Victor. Henry's good moral character contrasts with Victor's weakness and shows how when people make really bad decisions, it always ends up hurting their innocent friends and family. Some of Henry's functions got offloaded onto the character of William, but I still wish he'd been in the film. And that brings me to William. In the book, he's a little boy, but the film ages up both of the characters so that William is now a young man and Victor is probably in his 30s. In the book, Mr. and Mrs. Frankenstein loved all three of their sons, but in the film, William is the father's favorite, spoiled and adored, while Victor was expected to study hard and got smacked if he wasn't perfect. The brothers care about each other, maybe, but what I felt while watching the film is that all of this was performative and kind of out of obligation. Like, Victor says he loves his brother, but he treats him like a servant and isn't very grateful toward him. And then William does do everything that Victor asks him to do, but literally his last words to him are basically like, "I never liked you that much anyway." The biggest change to the brothers' relationship is that in the film, Elizabeth is not engaged to Victor, but instead, she's now William's betrothed. Either way, both versions of William get violently dispatched by the creature, but I'll get into that in a moment. So you can see how many massive changes have been made just to the side characters, but now we're on to the big three: Elizabeth, Victor, and the creature.
Woof!
In the 1818 first edition of Frankenstein, Elizabeth Lavenza is Victor's cousin, but in the revised 1831 version, she's an unrelated orphan who's taken in and raised by the Frankenstein family. I suspect that change was made because cousin marriage gives most people the ick. In the book, Elizabeth is blonde and angelically beautiful with a very sweet personality. She's a perfect model of 19th century femininity, caring for the Frankenstein family and showing patience, devotion, and affection toward Victor. The film version of Elizabeth is a redhead, but this change means her hair contrasts beautifully against the colors in the sets and costumes. The film version of Elizabeth didn't grow up with the Frankenstein family, and her last name has been changed to Harlander. She's no longer an Italian orphan, but rather the wealthy niece of Heinrich Harlander. Victor only meets her after her brother introduces them. She's been moderned up a bit, taking an interest in science, but these changes don't push outside what you might find in a 19th century woman with a good education. She keeps her role as an empathetic caretaker, showing compassion for the creature. In fact, she is way more interested in the creature than she is in William.
Woof!
Victor gets fixated on Elizabeth, and more than once he tries to steal her away from his little brother, including on her wedding day. This is a huge change from the book, where Victor and Elizabeth were very much in love. And the big plot twist is that this isn't a love triangle between Victor, Elizabeth, and William. In fact, it's a love rectangle, because Elizabeth not appearing to be very into William isn't a plot hole because she's actually into the creature. Or at least she says that her wish was to die while the creature watched. So she's in love with death? It's a love pentagon? So now we have arrived at Victor and the creature. In the novel, these characters are a mix of good and bad. Victor is a mostly good person who makes the massive mistake of playing God, and the creature is someone who wants to be good but becomes angry and alienated when not just his creator, but society in general rejects him. Both Victor and the creature do things that are selfless and murderous. The subtitle of the novel is The Modern Prometheus, and this refers to the ancient Greek legend of the Titan Prometheus, who stole the divine power of fire and gave it to humanity without permission. He ends up being punished by being chained to a giant rock so a big eagle can show up every day and pick out his liver, which grows back over and over again. The Greeks were so fun! Victor is similarly tormented throughout the book by the knowledge that he stole the divine power to create life and unleashed something awful into the world. He's a very Byronic figure, slowly consumed by illness caused by his inner turmoil. I've talked about Byronic themes before when my daughter and I analyzed the lyrics of the song Blank Space by Taylor Swift. I'll put a link to that in the show notes if you want to explore your inner tortured poet and understand a little bit more about the sort of character that Victor Frankenstein is. Guillermo Del Toro decided to make Victor totally evil and the creature totally good. Victor is a textbook psychopath. He only sees the people around him as objects to be used and disposed of as he sees fit. He uses Harlander for his money so that he can pay for his lab and bribe officials to get his ingredients. He uses William's loyalty to get his lab built and to have access to Elizabeth. He does not care that his ghoulish experiments show no respect for the dead or that the creatures he reanimates appear to be in incredible pain and confusion. He desires Elizabeth, but he doesn't respect her. He acts like a creep to her on numerous occasions, even barging into her bedroom on her wedding day when she's about to get married to his brother. He frames the creature for the deaths of Harlander and Elizabeth. This is a man who, when asked if it's right to meddle with the forces of nature, cries out, "Then God is inept?" I'm running out of fingers to count Victor's misdeeds. Victor is a total control freak, completely disregarding the needs and feelings of others. It's a bold choice to make a main character who is totally evil, and Del Toro's writing and Oscar Isaac's performance come together to make this a very rich, detailed character. Nothing has been overlooked. I even noticed that in one scene where everyone else was drinking wine, Victor was drinking milk, and this can seem like something really small, but it shows how even in the items that they were putting on the dining table, they wanted to show that Victor is so obsessed with what he's doing that he won't even have a drop of wine at dinner because it might dull his focus. This version of Victor lives in a parallel universe that is a lot more corrupt and immoral than the historical 19th century, because in reality he would have been arrested at the beginning of the film after his medical experiment where he plays catch with a guy who did not ask to be brought back to life. The scene is set up as if only some stodgy old Puritans oppose his work and all the students are cheering him on. This scene takes place in Edinburgh 30 years after a massive scandal where two shady characters named Burke and Hare started bumping people off in order to sell their bodies for use in anatomy classes. After this, Parliament passed the Anatomy Act to control how bodies could be used, and I suspect the cops would have had questions for Victor. The corrupted morality of the world in the film is what makes me see this story as like a fraternal twin to the novel rather than a straight adaptation. In the movie, Victor was able to be pretty open about everything that he was doing, and this contrasts with the book where he had to keep everything a secret, not just for legal reasons, but because of the strong taboos that come from the Christian moral setting of 19th century Europe. You actually see William and Elizabeth enabling his work in the film, whereas the book characters would have been completely horrified and probably had him sent to a funny farm, never to be spoken of again for fear of ruining the family reputation. It was a bold and brilliant choice to make Victor's character so purely evil, but it does create a slight problem for the ending that I'll talk about in a moment. But first we need to finish up with the creature. There are big physical differences between the creature in the book and the film. Both of them are large and strong, but the book version of the creature doesn't have any superpowers. I also don't recall any description of those abs, but I'll allow it. In the film, the creature has super strength and super healing, and the super ability to make Elizabeth more interested in him than guys who are properly alive. He can't die, even when he wants to. He's basically half Wolverine and half Edward Cullen, except instead of sparkling, he oozes. In the book, Victor is totally responsible for the creature's creation. He makes it in his attic, stealing parts from mortuaries and anatomy labs. He hides his work and is consumed by it. Once he brings the creature to life, he's so horrified by what he's done that he just runs off. The poor creature has to stumble through the world with no guidance at all, and after trying to make friends and serve others, he quickly becomes angry and alienated after being treated with cruelty. That is how he becomes a monster. This theme is why Frankenstein is a book that troubled teens can relate to. The creature doesn't have any parents to look after him. He tries to find a foster home, but is abused and rejected, and so becomes very angry and alienated and eventually lashes out with violence. The creature is responsible for his crimes, but none of them probably would have happened if his dad hadn't walked out on him. Del Toro's version of the character is a being of perfect morality. He's innocent and pure of heart, wanting to be cared for, but just getting his heart broken when Victor whips him, chains him, and orders him around like he's just a machine. After the creature escapes from the lab, he has a picnic in the woods with deer like he's a Disney princess. Even after he's shot by humans, he never becomes angry at humanity in general. He understands why people fear him and carries no grudges against anyone but Victor. In the novel, the creature has a body count of 3. The first to go is little William, and after doing the deed, the creature frames the babysitter, so her fate is on his conscience as well. Second is poor Henry Clerval, and Victor is framed for the deed but eventually cleared. Last is Elizabeth, who the creature comes for immediately after her wedding to Victor. Her marriage bed becomes her deathbed. All 3 of these murders were premeditated, and the creature uses his bare hands to do the deed, echoing the crime Victor committed by using his hands to tamper with nature. The creature chooses to do these evil things after being twisted with hatred and rage. In the film, the creature kills several people and animals, but only in self-defense. 6 sailors are done in at the beginning of the film, but each one is armed and going directly for the creature. The same thing happens later when the creature fights off wolves, and again when a group of men attack him inside Victor's mansion. The creature doesn't show any restraint when he fights, but then neither are his attackers, and as soon as nobody's attacking him, he's not a threat anymore. So he really is morally spotless even after being involved in some pretty gruesome fights. The creature's goodness does allow for some really moving character development, like when he befriends an old blind man. In the book, this scene only lasts for a few moments, but the movie allows an entire winter to pass in which the creature learns to read and develops a beautiful friendship with the old man, who's masterfully played by David Bradley. After losing his only friend, the creature approaches Victor to ask for a companion. The sadness and longing is palpable. This is someone who finally found out what it means to belong, and yet he knows he can't find a place among humanity. So he asks for someone to join him so they can be monsters together. Monsters Together would have made a great name for an emo band back in 2003. In the film, Victor doesn't even stop to think. He says no way to the idea of creating a female creature. In the book, he does at first give in, but then stops and destroys his creation partway through because he realizes that making the same mistake twice is a terrible idea. In the book, we don't see the scene where the creature comes for Elizabeth, but in the film version, Elizabeth finds the creature and she is like way happier to see him than her fiancé.
You're incorrigible.
Victor, who's lying on the floor because he's been given a righteous pummeling for being a total jerk, reaches for a pistol and fires at the couple. He intends to hit the creature, but of course hits Elizabeth right in the spleen. This is a monumental change. In the book, the creature kills Elizabeth to get revenge for not receiving his own companion. Now, Victor is the one who's responsible for Elizabeth's death, and she says to the creature, "Take me with you," while her fiancé is laying on the ground mortally wounded. Like, poor William, he gets such a raw deal in this story. Instead of Victor being the one who's framed for crimes he didn't commit, the creature's the one who's wronged. The novel's conclusion shows how both creator and creation have been twisted and destroyed by Victor's choice to meddle in things that he shouldn't have. At the end of the film, the creature is the one trying to put an end to Victor, who just can't stop being evil and getting people killed. Victor, as his brother says with his dying breath, is the real monster. These are bold choices, and they're brilliantly played by the actors, but it does make the ending a little bit difficult for me. In the novel, both Victor and the creature can recognize that they've been twisted and turned into monsters, and so they accept their fates. But this time, it's so clear that Victor deserves what he's getting, and that the creature has been so uniformly wronged that it makes it hard for me to believe either that Victor is sorry or that there's any reason to forgive him. Victor does say sorry to the creature, but I don't believe him. As his life fades, he looks at the creature and says, "Forgive me." So even in a moment where he's trying to find peace, he's still ordering the creature around. Victor is an absolute loser. What a brilliantly written villain. At the end of the novel, the creature arrives shortly after Victor's death, boards the ship, sees everything that has happened, and decides to wander off onto the ice to off himself. In the film, the creature chooses to live, crossing the ice to welcome the rising sun as the Danish sailors get the heck out of there. The ending to this dark and violent tale is surprisingly optimistic. The creature is gonna try to find a place to belong somewhere in the world. And I'm sure a bunch of goth girls out there would be delighted to help him.
Oh, I think I love him.
I've finished my pot of tea, which means now it's time to stop because I could go on for weeks talking about this film and the book it's based on. Not all faithful adaptations make for very good movies, and not all adaptations that divert wildly from a text are bad films. This adaptation is about as book accurate as those Percy Jackson films, but where The Lightning Thief was a train wreck, this is a masterpiece. Guillermo Del Toro's Frankenstein gets a low Snape score because it's overhauled so much of the plot and characters. I award it 1 Snape. And it's also the best film I've seen this year. And now I leave it to you. Have you seen Frankenstein? What did you think about it? Have you ever read the novel, or are you mostly just familiar with this story because of the gajillion film adaptations that have been made of it? Why do you think that this story in particular seems to have so much to offer to filmmakers year after year? I'd love to hear from you. And as always, thanks for listening.